The, talking a little bit about team preparation and team dynamics. I was talking to Charles just a moment ago right there. You do know that the word dynamics and dynamite come from the same root word. Team dynamite's probably not the best thing, though we did think about it a few times. I want to talk about it in several different aspects. I want to talk about it in terms of personnel, and this isn't necessarily just about Ecuador. It's just some things that we tried to learn while we were there. Talk about it as far as personnel, prayer time, people who were very vital to what we did, and then even some of the preaching that made a huge impact on me and others. When I think about some of the personnel, there were 5 families that actually got to the field. We started with 7. And 2 of those families, Steve Levesque and his wife, Nora, actually she was from Ecuador. And they didn't get to the field. We also had another family, Bobby Orr and his wife Bertha, that were up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He had worked in Ecuador as a single man for a lot of years, married Bertha, who was from Ecuador, and they didn't get to the field. And I thought that was really strange because of all of the ones that you would have expected to get there first, it would have been the ones that had already had experience there, and they never got to the field. There was a part of me, even in prayer time, and thinking about that. Lord, if you want us there, it's going to have to be you working on it. It's part of the reason that I like the song, Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. If you're going to get to the field, it's going to be very much a God thing. Unless you're just an incredible fundraiser and they want to get rid of you or they're trying to do something like that. That could be part of it as well. But we made some, I remember sitting right here and hearing Doyle Gillum years and years ago. And Doyle made a comment. I came here just like most of you came through the 2-year program, had already set up some things to go back to the congregation that I came from and to be an associate minister with them. Was looking forward to that in Joplin. Had lots of folks who were already excited about us coming back, and we had spent a summer there working with that congregation, and then another summer working with an area congregation there. So they're very excited. I remember 29 years ago this month, Gerald Payton went with me back to Joplin to tell him that I was going overseas. That wasn't well received. After 2 years of coming back and forth and working with them, they were very excited, I think, to have us come back and to work with them. But I remember sitting here, and I remember the change. I remember the time. I remember hearing that very sermon from Doyle that at least made me start to think in other areas, in other ways. Doyle was preaching, and he talked about his time in Malawi, Africa. And he used this illustration. He said, imagine you look and you've got 10 guys, and you tell these 10 guys to go lift this big heavy log. And 10 guys could do that, right? But you see 9 guys go to one end and 1 guy on the other end by himself. And his question was, where would you go to help? And of course, the smart alecks all went, well, we'd go with the 9 because it'd be a whole lot lighter there. But the thought was, and the illustration was, why are you going to leave that 1 guy over there by himself? And his point was this. He said at that time, and I'm sure the statistics are different now, he said 7% of the world's population has 95% of the world's gospel preachers. I didn't like to hear that. That bothered me. And again, I'm not sure that those statistics are as accurate today as they were then, but we were talking about the United States. We have 7% of the world's population. We had 95% of the world's gospel preachers. That bothered me. He used that thing that we've heard before right there of everybody deserves to hear it once before anybody deserves to hear it the second time. There were all kinds of thoughts like that, all kinds of things that were being said. And one of the things that I love about Sunset now, just like I loved it when I was here in school, was that at least 60 to 70% of all the instructors have been on the mission field. And the ones that haven't lived there have visited often. That changes the dynamic around here, doesn't it? That changes how we see things. It changes the way that we look at the world. It's not just about our little corner. It's about world. Can you sit in here and look at these flags day after day and not remember that? And so from that particular lesson, my thinking began to change. There were other aspects to it as well. My brother-in-law, Toby Huff, I don't really claim him, claim my sister. She just made a silly mistake, 40-some years ago. Now, Toby and Kathy, they came here. He graduated in 73, went to New Guinea. He was part of the team that went with the Harrisons, Lemoyne and Curtis, and several of those guys, and were there for lots of years. They're still on the mission field. They were in New Guinea, have been in New Zealand, have been in Vanuatu, went to Fiji, and they're back in Vanuatu. And so they've been doing this mission work thing for about 40 years. And so I'd been hearing, he would come home from time to time and show us pictures of the folks in New Guinea who, the bones in the noses, that was real folks at that particular time when he first began working over there in the villages. The other thing with that is watching all that take place. At least I was hearing about other places. Then my brother, who was 7 years older than I was, decided to go to Brand X. He went down to Whites Ferry Road. And as he was in Whites Ferry Road, he decided that he was going to join a team to go to Argentina, and did. And went to Rosario and spent 5 years there. So I'm getting this from lots of different folks. I'm here to hear in school, and I'm getting it from family members and everything else, and I've got lots of different voices. And sometimes those voices are pretty easy to hear, and sometimes it's pretty scary when you start thinking about, I don't know if I can do that. I'm not sure I could do that. But Kent Markham showed up. Some of you know Kent, but Kent Markham showed up and wanted to go to school. He'd already had his degree in Bible from Oklahoma Christian, but he wanted to take some classes here, and he wanted to try to raise a team. And we got to spending some time with Kent and Charla and some others that were around here, and thought, maybe. And so we began to take a few trips together. We began to go on different survey trips, and went down to Mexico City. Klein, at that particular time, we already had a team that was getting ready and preparing to go to Mexico City. Jay Jarbo and that big team, Terry, all those guys. And we were right behind them in school, and so we were thinking, okay, one team's probably not going to do it in Mexico City. All the wisdom behind all that. But Klein was kind of pushing us to be maybe a second wave or a second team to go there. And we thought about that and looked at Mexico City, looked around at some of the other surrounding cities around there, ended up in Toluca, had the opportunity to go to Puebla, had a chance to look at some of those surrounding cities, Cuernavaca. But we were looking at some of those areas as well. But then we had the opportunity, I don't remember the occasion that we found out something about Quito, Ecuador. And so a few of us decided that we would go down and look at the city of Quito, particularly. It was part of the Great Cities, Continent of Great Cities thing was very strong. Ted Stewart was here. He was a part of that, was a part of the mission. So we had, again, all these influences, and they were saying Quito would be a good place. It's a major city. It's the capital city of the country, would have an impact on a lot of different, at least the potential is there. And we had that opportunity to go down there. A couple of elders from Joplin went with us, which I thought that really helped in the change of mind right there when the elders came back and said, this is a good place. This is a place that we could get behind. Joplin was going to be our sponsoring congregation. Couldn't do a lot financially, but was willing to be that funnel and to be the people who were behind us. Appreciated that so much about them, but we kind of got partway through, and we were about halfway to where we needed to be financially, and thought, doesn't look like it's going to happen. Same thing's going to happen to us that happened to the Levesques and happened to the Orrs. We're not going to be able to raise the money to go there. We were having different team retreats. We had gone to different places, had been out in Pueblo, Colorado, and had that chance to meet Kent's sponsoring congregation. We had one scheduled for Ark City, Kansas, which Dan Leaf, that was his sponsoring congregation, Dan and Kathy. And so we went over there, and it was middle of summer, and it was hot, and July, and a family came through that knew the Markhams that were from over in Tennessee, over a place called Jackson, Tennessee, and a congregation called Campbell Street. And the head of missions that I didn't know at that particular time was coming through with his family and his 5 kids, and the air conditioner broke down. Well, that's a bad trip right there if you've got 5 kids in a van and no air conditioning in the middle of July. So they took it into the Ford dealership, and as it was being fixed, it took them 3 or 4 hours. We talked about what we were wanting to do and what was going on. And he said, I'm going to be back at home here in a couple of weeks. Why don't you and Danny come over and spend the weekend with us? And we did. And from that point on, Campbell Street became our sponsoring congregation, took more than half of our support, helped us in so many different ways. But the team preparation that was going on, all of that, get-togethers, we had 3 or 4 different team retreats. We didn't know one another. This was not a class thing. This was not like a class where, okay, we all know one another or we're a class apart right here. The Markhams came, he came for a year to study some different, so he's in different classes than I am. Dan and Kathy Leaf were a year and a half ahead of me. They were basically already gone. They were still hanging around here doing some educational stuff in the church, the education department. Joe and Susan Placencia that were part of this team, they were graduates of Bear Valley and Abilene Christian, and had been a part of a team, and it had blown up. They were going to go to Colombia and found out that there was a team that was thinking about Ecuador, and so they came, and we had to have some time to really get to know one another. We did some other testing. You know the name Chalco, Sasha and Ivanka and Franco's parents were part of this team. Franco was born on the field there in Ecuador. He was in the Spanish department, so again, we didn't rub shoulders that much. Saw them, knew their faces and all that, but we really didn't know one another very well. So we spent quite a bit of time just trying to get to know one another and visit with one another. But it needed to be more than that. We started doing team interaction stuff. Gerald Payton, Truman Scott, and others began to get us together and to talk to us. We did some linguistic studies. Aptitude for language. I don't know that was anything that I did very well. Aptitude certainly wasn't there. The desire was there. We did some other studies, the Edwards preference test that we had to do here in school back in those days, as well as the Taylor-Johnson that you guys are still doing. We did that as a team, did that together, and began to talk about those dynamics between the guys and how they would work together. And one of the things that Truman did was to talk to us about how the women would interact with one another and work together. And there were some warnings, there were some cautions. That's probably a better word. There were some cautions given of yes, there may be some difficulties there. It was one of those kinds of things in our minds. Yeah, but we're mature Christians. We can deal with anything. Where we kind of ignore some of those kinds of things, really didn't take it very seriously until we actually got to the field. We had to put together different things like what you would do in any missions class. Put together a PERT chart. Had this nice long flowing. Had a picture of it just the other day. Josh Markham had a picture of it and posted it in this big old long 7 or 8 foot thing right there. And it was 3-pronged in nature. It was our education, it was evangelism, and it was and church edification. And we used that, and that ran for a 10-year. I think we just used it to cover up some of the holes in the walls, because a lot of those things, after a while, you begin to change. But there were some really helpful things in that as well. It gave us something to begin with. It gave us something to start with. We had to do a culture gram. We had to do some of those kinds of things that began to prepare us for looking at the field. Where are we going, and what's it going to be like there? What's the major religion there? What's the makeup of the people? What kind of folks are going to be there? What are we going to be dealing with? All those things that were extremely important to us. But throughout it all, we continued to pray. We got together here, the Markhams and the Leafs, while they were still here before they left, and we were praying on a weekly basis here for help, for God's help, for God's guidance. We weren't really sure what we were doing. We tried to learn as best we could from the San Paulo team, Steps into the Mission Field. The book was helpful in watching other teams. We didn't have a lot of other team a lot of other teams that had gone before us. The team that was going to Mexico City, we took some stuff from them as well and began to put that into our contract with one another, our covenant with one another, probably a better word. But there were some people that were vital to that here and that began to talk to us. It wasn't just school stuff. We had the opportunity to be in different ones' homes. We were in Klein and Joe's home several times, Klein Payton. And if you were going to be in Klein's home, he was going to talk about Italy, wasn't he? I mean, those of you that know, he was going to talk about his time in Italy. He was going to talk about his trips in other places. They were going to try as best they could to get you to go wherever they could go. He was one of the best at shoulder tapping and helping you and talking and visiting with you. We were in Truman and Fern's home a number of times. Not only in their home while we were here, but during the time we were on the mission field for those 5 years, Truman and Fern made 3 trips to Ecuador. Now, they could have gone a lot of different places, but they came to Quito, and they helped us in a lot of different areas. When we came back off of the mission field, you come back basically with nothing, so where are you going to stay? Well, they opened up their home, and we stayed with them for the first 5 weeks before we found a place to stay when we came back to Lubbock as well. Gerald and Bobby Payton, again, if you're going to be in their home, they're going to talk missions, aren't they? That's who they are. It's not just what they're about, it's who they are as well. Doyle and Louise Gillum, we spent a great deal of time, and I think probably the biggest impact on Danny being ready to go was her time with Louise. At that particular time, Louise was in charge of child care downstairs, what Miss Debbie does. She was in charge of child care, and Danny worked in the nursery. So for 2 years, while they're rocking babies and changing diapers and all the stuff that they're doing with the little babies on that end of the building, Louise is telling Danny about her time in Malawi, raising a family, having children over there, all the different aspects. And lots of things come to mind as stuff that she reminded. And I think that's what helped Danny at least be open to the idea of living in a different culture, in a different place. That Louise did so well in that culture. Ted Stewart, I've mentioned before that he was here, and he was such a great help to us after having lived a number of years in Brazil and having that desire to see other folks go to big cities and have an impact in a lot of different ways. I would hope that you would spend a lot of time in prayer. That it not just be about the folks that you get along with while you're in class. One of the things that I've noticed is that you don't necessarily have to be great friends to be really good teammates. You don't have to be classmates to be good teammates. You don't even have to speak the same language, at least to begin with, to be really good teammates. Dante's major language was Spanish. He knew a little bit of English. When he first got down there, we weren't ready, really, to start our team meetings in Spanish, but didn't have a choice. If we wanted him to be able to understand, our Spanish was probably a little further along than his English, and so you can imagine what those first few team meetings were like, trying to communicate in, again, a language that wasn't our own, but communicate well, and to try to understand and give assignments and everything else. And that was one of the things that we did. We had regular, weekly team meetings. Before the team meeting, one of the best things that we did is we got together for team devotional time. And there were times that people would travel and be away, that they would have to go some other place. But every Friday morning we got together and we had devotional time. We sang and we read scripture and we'd have a little talk, and we just got together as a team to enjoy one another's company. It wasn't about work, and it wasn't about assignments. It wasn't about any of those things. It was just, let's enjoy our time in the Lord. Let's enjoy our relationships in the Lord right here. And that was a great way to begin, because then that afternoon, then we had our team meetings. So it kind of set the tone, I think, a better tone for the day. Make sure that you spend as much time, grab as much as you can when it has to do with missions. And when I say that, it's not just about books. I love to read books, and I love to hear from those that are out there of practices and methodologies and lots of different things that they would use and the way that they would approach that. I'm grateful for that. But let it be more than that. Rub shoulders with the guys that are around here. Just because you may be going to a different place than some of the places that these guys have gone, spend some time talking with Stuart. Rub shoulders with Terry and Victor and Charles, and talk to these guys. And one of the things I love about the AIM programs, I look at the guys who've been on the mission field and how that makes sense, doesn't it? That you guys would be going to different places right there, that they would have experience in that as well. Talk to them about that. Pick their brain. Ask them, what would you do in these kinds of situations? That also sets up opportunities then when you call back, when you come back on furlough, when you have those opportunities to really visit with them and to say, okay, now it's not theory anymore. Now it's real. This is what's going on. This is what's happening right here. How would you approach that? How would you deal with that so that we can get through it and do it well? So as you have those opportunities, as you have those chances right here, particularly, let me encourage you again to really consider strongly the missions program, to come through, to be able to talk to those guys and to go through those studies. I know you hear about missions an awful lot in the 2-year program. But several years ago when we began this, we actually had a couple of our missions, 2 or 3, I think, of our missions classes in the 2-year program. And when that was taken back out and put back into the missions program, I think it made it even stronger. So there are some things that you're not going to get in the 2-year program that you're probably going to need in talking about adjustments. Some people make those adjustments well, some not so well. And it really does help you to be able to kind of look at yourself, a self-evaluation as it were. Can I do this? One of the things that we do, even on the church side right here, when we began to send missionaries out, is when we send them out for a survey trip, it's not just to see whether or not, they can find the grocery store and that kind of stuff. That's important. But it's, can you live in this culture without becoming a hermit? Can you get into this culture and can you thrive in it? Not just survive, but can you thrive in this thing? Can you get out there and do you mix and meet people well? Do you get out there and enjoy that kind of thing? That's important. And so survey trips need to be more than just, do you like the climate? Does it have palm trees and pretty scenery and stuff? It's got to be more than that, guys. It has to be something much deeper inside of you, that why you're going and who you're going to be talking to right here is going to be something important. I think about the scripture that we read today, and I've asked myself the question several times, when we talk about team dynamics, why is it that we run to Acts chapter 15 first? Is that the only passage that talks about team dynamics? And if that's the only passage that talks about team dynamics, we're in trouble, aren't we? Right? Well, all we got here is this great big, this sharp disagreement right there in verse 39 of Acts 15, and that they separate from one another, and we're thinking, well, I don't have anything at all good to say about team. Is that the case? How about all the other passages throughout Acts where it's, we went here, and we went here, and we went here, and we did this, and isn't that team? And doesn't that tell us something about team dynamics as well? So when you're reading through Acts, don't just get stuck in one little area right here and looking at, well, here's what happens when you've got a problem, okay? Even that was resolved well, wasn't it? And so when you start to open up and you begin to look at missions as a whole, let Scripture have its effect. Let Scripture grab you. Let Scripture take a hold of you, and let people like Ted Stewart's and the Doyle Gillams and the Gerald Paydens and the Truman Scotts and the Klein Paydens, let those kind of folks, because they're sitting around you right now, let them have a major impact on you as well. God bless.